Thank you for joining me tonight for our presentation on Don't Panic, Resources for Proofreading Your Students' Writing. I'm Kelly Day, and I am Lake Orion Community Schools 6th through 12th grade instructional coach. So sometimes the task of helping your child in their writing can be extremely daunting. You may feel like you don't even know where to start. You may even feel like your own writing skills are not strong enough to help your child with their own writing. So my general advice is this: don't overcomplicate it and don't do the writing for them. We're going to tackle 3 areas today. I'm going to provide some suggestions for ways to support your child's writing at home, ways to empower your young writer through self-reflection, and I'll wrap things up by sharing some online resources for the grammar amateur. Let's move into ways to support your students' writing at home. My biggest advice here is to not focus entirely on grammar, which is what many may want to do. When we stop to really think about the act of composition, it's so much more than grammar. It's idea generation, elaboration, analysis, creation. It's taking the ideas from your head and putting them down on paper. And yes, sometimes the grammar is so bad that it seems like that's all that you can see, but I want to encourage you to first start with the ideas, then fine-tune with editing and revising grammar. So the very first thing you need to do is make yourself familiar with the task at hand. It always amazes me the number of times I sit down to work with student writers and they forget that their teacher has given them actual requirements and a rubric that'll help guide their writing. So the first thing you want to do is make yourself familiar with that assignment and rubric. Once I've looked that over, I have a much better understanding of what's expected of the student. Additionally, I find it helpful to dissect the requirements with the student. And so by that I mean, grab a highlighter or a colored pen and underline, circle, pull emphasis to the things that seem to matter most on that assignment. Really pull those details out and help your student focus on just that. So oftentimes in our Lake Orion writing rubrics, you might see words like elaboration, organization, lead, ending, transitions, craft, and conventions. Those tend to drive the aspects of our writing process. So I want to kind of clarify what some of them mean. Lead and ending are just other words for introduction and conclusion. Craft, that's looking at the writer's craft, the things that a writer does specific to that particular genre. So for instance, if a student is doing some narrative writing, then they probably should be using some storytelling techniques, like dialogue, maybe internal monologue, and so forth. Conventions, that's grammar, spelling, punctuation. Now, if you're looking at the requirements or a rubric with your student and you're really not sure where you should focus your attention, I would encourage you to start with elaboration and organization. Those 2 areas tend to be common areas that give some writers some trouble. So when we're thinking about elaboration, we're thinking about how writers are explaining their ideas. How are they using analysis? How are they developing their ideas? And then how are they connecting those ideas back to their claim? Now, for many of us, when we were in school, we didn't learn it as claim, we learned it as thesis. But in recent years, we've been moving towards the word claim instead of thesis. And then with organization, taking a look at how your student is using paragraph breaks, if they're using paragraph breaks, and then also thinking about the logical flow of ideas. Does it need to be presented in a chronological manner? Does it need to be presented in order of importance? But elaboration and organization are 2 areas where you can definitely spend some time working with your child. The second thing that I want you to do is try and find some samples or exemplars that came from the teacher for that particular writing assignment, and then study those with your student. If your student doesn't have those examples or exemplars in their notebook or in their binders, reach out to the teacher and ask for help. They should be able to give you some student samples and some exemplars to help guide your student writer. What I like to do is take that sample and set it out next to the requirements in the rubric. So that way I can kind of get an illustrated view of what the requirements in the rubric are asking of the writer. So then, based on the assignment requirements, the rubric, and the samples, you may have a good idea about where you want to start with your child. But before you announce your plan, ask your child where they think they need to start. They may have already gotten some feedback from their teacher or a peer, so they may have a good idea about what to focus on first. Once you've agreed on a starting point, stick with it. Check out your students or check out your child's writer's notebook or their journal for tools and tips. Many times teachers have already asked them to do some jotting. Many times teachers have asked them to, copy notes down or copy charts down into their notebook. So that way those tools and tips are already there. As you look through their notebook, you might also discover some of the drafts and revisions that your child has already done, which could then provide you with some insight into the progress your child has already made. So moving on to feedback. I like to think about this from a glow and grow perspective. Glow meaning that you're going to provide some compliments, and grow meaning that you're going to try and help your child to grow as a writer. Always start with something positive. Oftentimes, students might not even recognize when they're doing something well. Point it out to them and talk with them about why it's a glowing aspect of their writing. We want our writers to keep doing those great things. And if they don't realize that they're doing those great things, then they might not continue to do them. Then you can move into that constructive feedback to help them grow their writing. Okay, the second thing I want you to think about is how you can help empower your student writer. You are not going to be there with them every single day to help them write all the way through adulthood. So we need to find ways to put that ownership back on our students and to help empower them to use the resources available to them. We need to resist the urge to fix everything for our student writers. Instead, we need to help them use the tools they have at their disposal to guide their own reflection and revision during the writing process. And many a times, these tools are already in their notebook. So often students struggle with writing because they're having a hard time trying to connect to the assignment. And so I always think it's worth it to sit down and help your student do some brainstorming and some idea generating and help them see that they can find ways to connect to the assignment at hand. Draw from personal experiences, personal interests, and prior knowledge. Then, before they sit down and write or before they sit down and revise, have a conversation with them, talk their ideas through with them before they put pen onto paper. That's going to help them to clarify their thinking. It's kind of like a dress rehearsal for their writing. Once they find a personal connection, once they've done some clarifying of their thinking, they should feel more comfortable and empowered to continue with the work. I love using checklists. I like using checklists because I like being able to cross things off. And I think that empowers me to continue doing the work at hand, even if it's work that I really don't want to do. And so I think that using checklists with our student writers is really helpful. So there's a couple different ways that you can create and use checklists. First, check their notebook because many times teachers have already given out a checklist that you can use. If that's not the case, or if you are looking for a different particular checklist, you can help create one on your own. Go through the assignment requirements and just, pull out those key words and those key requirements. Same thing with the rubric. You could create a quick checklist with your student to help them go through and check their organization or cross off the steps for revision. One of my favorite ways to create a checklist, though, is to use a piece of sample writing. And that's what I'm going to show you on the next slide. So this is a sample piece of writing for an argument essay at the high school level. And so I'm going to just pull out some of our important characteristics here and show you how I might create a checklist for, help create a checklist for a student doing the same type of writing. So I look at the opening paragraph, and the first thing that I notice is that it definitely has a claim, that point that they're trying to prove. And that comes through where it says, extending our high school career to 5 years would make an important and beneficial impact on our future. And so I'm going to start my checklist over here and say claim. Okay. Then I'm going to go down into the next body paragraph. And I notice that they are providing some supporting ideas here. Further along in that paragraph, and I notice that they provide some evidence. And the last thing I notice about this paragraph is that the writer has spent some time doing some analysis and some elaboration. So now, not only do I have a model for what the writing should look like, but I also have a checklist that I've created there on the left. So that way, when I'm going through, and if I'm a student writer and I'm going through and I'm looking at my own writing and doing some revision and some reflection, I can check off if I've done those things. Another way to empower your student writer is to encourage them to read their writing out loud. A lot of times students don't want to read it out loud. They think that just reading it silently to themselves, they're going to catch the mistakes that they might not recognize. And that might be true, but I promise you they will catch more if they take the time to read it out loud. And then there's a couple different ways you can do this. They could just read it out loud to themselves. But you might even want to encourage them to record it, and then they can go back and listen to it out loud as well. They might catch another round of mistakes or areas that they want to improve upon. Overall, we need to make sure that we respect your students as writers. What to revise and how to revise it should be your child's decision, not yours. So by extension, the voice that they should have in their writing should be theirs. Instead of doing the writing for your child, offer suggestions. Think about ways that you can help empower them and help them to own their writing. And remember that your child must learn to think and write on their own. Okay, so the last little bit that I have for you tonight is some online resources that might help you or your student do a little bit of grammar practice and improvement. So some really great resources for lessons and practice. Khan Academy has some really wonderful tutorial videos that'll explain various parts of speech and punctuation and so forth. Quill.org and noredink.com are both sites that have some lesson and some practice built into it. And I like those because they're interactive and they also provide pretty simple or basic explanations for why something would be incorrect or correct. And then TED Ed, which is a spin-off of TED.com and TED Talks, has a couple of lessons out there on various grammar and punctuation. And so I've included two different tiny URLs that'll take you to a couple different lessons that are pretty short, but also pretty engaging as well. And then if you're looking for a grammar checker beyond, um, the one that's included with Microsoft Word, you can go to grammarly.com. And in fact, you can add on, it's free, you can add on to Microsoft Edge, the Grammarly app or I don't know what they call it, but app. And so that's just another grammar checker that may be actually a little bit more robust than what is provided in Microsoft Word. So those are just a couple of various websites that might help you as you work with your student on revising some of their grammar. I do want to leave you with that thought, though, that spend your time focusing on helping them with getting their ideas down and explaining their ideas and elaborating on their ideas and organizing their ideas, and then move into helping them with various bits of grammar. That wraps up our time for today. I know, like I started off with at the beginning, that working with your student on grammar can be very daunting, but it doesn't have to be. Reach out to their teachers, go through their student notebooks and see what they have at hand. And start small, because not only do you not want to feel overwhelmed, but you don't want your child to feel overwhelmed either. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks for joining me tonight.